Hello and welcome to our Lakeside Chat. We are David Wofford and Katie Noonan, co-chairs of the Rotary Nature Center Friends. And we're so happy that you can join us tonight.
As we begin our program, it is important for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, that Lake Merritt is part of Ohlone territory. We hear now from Corinna Gould, spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of LaShawn and co-founder of Segura Te Land Trust.
Good afternoon, relatives. My name is Corinna Gould. I am the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of LaShawn. We are here today at what most folks think of as Lake Merritt. We are in the territory of Huichin. Huichin is actually a territory that encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so this is a place that my ancestors have been since the beginning of time. And this was a place of abundance. I'm so happy that people from all walks of life that now come into our territory can enjoy this beautiful place that my ancestors have enjoyed since the beginning of time. My relationship to the land that I have been born to, raising my children and grandchildren here, has been to tell the story, the truth of what happened on this land before other people came here. I'm hoping that as we begin to learn these lessons of fires in California, the pandemic that's happening, that human beings come back to living in reciprocity with the earth.
Thank you, Corinna. Such an important message today as we are living through some of the impacts of climate change brought about by human activities and changes in the landscape that cause problems. So I'm really happy that everybody can be here tonight to share this Lakeside Chat. So we'd like to begin with highlights of the month, and would like to say thank you to everybody who has contributed in so many ways to Rotary Nature Center Friends, a new nonprofit. There were many donations in the funding area, but also so many donations from people who came to work at the lake, to do citizen science at the lake. And we appreciate all of these kinds of contributions to bringing people and nature together at the lake, which is in our mission. So I have a personal highlight this month. It was my 50th wedding anniversary. Yes. And it happened on the 30th of November and of December, on the 30th of December. And we went out, of course, to see the tide gates and see what was going on just before the big storm. As most of you know, the big storm, the first big atmospheric river storm, hit on New Year's Eve. And here's a photo I took right outside the Nature Center looking towards the Bird Islands. And you can see that water is coming up onto the sidewalk. And this was going on all around the lake. Here we are at the boathouse, Lake Merritt Boating Center, where we do a lot of stuff. And the water was just coming over the top of the docks. It's quite an amazing thing. So I want to thank, I think the tides of Merritt are awesome. Really is impressive to be able to see them in the middle of an urban area. And I would like to say thank you to the county staff that's been working very hard to manage the somewhat unpredictable atmospheric river dumps on the watershed of Lake Merritt. And to all the people at Lake who have been sharing photos and information about what's happening with water levels as we go about our day during this period of atmospheric river rainfall, and also to everyone who has come out to pitch in and pick up trash. Currently, some of the cleanups are on hold, but we'll be having one on the 14th of January, unless there's some changes. Wanted to let everybody know that the rescue pelican Hank has weathered the storm very well, and he is, or she, excuse me, she has a number of friend pelicans that are joining her on the island, so she has company. And the people who are taking care of Hank and providing her with extra fish during this time when we don't know what the fish supply in the lake is, have been keeping her well fed. In fact, the day after the storm, she got two breakfasts. Want to quickly acknowledge the children and people who are looking at the water quality in the lake, and also looking at the plankton in the lake, because we know that plankton really caused one of the big harmful algal bloom die-off in August. And so it makes sense to try to follow up on that. So I want to thank everybody. There's so many people to thank that we could maybe move some of these to the end. And now stop my screen share. I just want to thank everybody who helps out at Lake Merritt, teaching, learning, and documenting this beautiful lake where we live. So at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Robin Agarwal. I met Robin when she arrived in the channel of Lake Merritt to check out a report by Adrian Cotter of a bloom of nudibranchs, beautiful kind of lavender pinky nudibranchs that were quite numerous in the Lake Merritt channel. And she arrived just the very day and came out multiple times. And she's going to tell us a bit about what she found out today, in her talk today. So Robin is has many hats. She was an enthusiast of bugs and tide pools when she was a child. But as later on she got into college, she went into liberal arts and got a liberal arts degree. And only after a while, after raising her children, and she has started to be able to get out and to do to follow her passion fully. She's been following it all along, but just to say that she's been a very active lady lately. She does photography and writing, and she co-edits the California Sea Slug Guide on iNaturalist. She also writes articles for Bay Nature and written articles for the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. And luckily, she's provided a link to all of her California nudibranch articles. And it really is a pleasure to click through them and to learn from all of the things that she has found out. So we're really very lucky to have her start our new year with this very fascinating topic: what led to the nudibranch Boomtown in Lake Merritt. Okay, and so so Kimberly, we're going to get that link into the chat momentarily. Okay, thank you. So Robin, are we ready to go?
Yeah, I let's hope this works. First of all, Katie, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. You clearly stalked me really well on the internet. Because that's pretty accurate, and it's not that easy to find all that. So thank you very much. And thank you especially to everyone for attending tonight. It's not everyone who wants to spend their Friday night learning about slugs in Lake Merritt. So yay for all of you. That's pretty excellent. But anyway, so let's just carry on. And if you have a question or you feel like, I haven't said something right, which could easily happen, then please jump in with a comment or unmute yourself and ask your question. This is a chat. It's not me just nattering on for an innumerable amount of time. So jump in if you feel like. I thought I'd first start with what is a nudibranch. For those of you who are Lake Merritt people and not nudibranch people, we seem to have two different types of people attending. Generally, we have the nudibranch crowd and we have the Lake Merritt crowd, and there's probably some intersection between those two things, but just in case, here we go. And I always like to start with this cartoon because I love Gary Larson very much, and this was my favorite nudibranch cartoon ever. For those of you who can't quite see it, maybe you're watching on your phone or something like that. There's a little blue vehicle filled with crabs, and they're going past the nudibranchs playing volleyball on the beach, and the mom crab is yelling, "Ah, it's a nudibranch beach. Drive, George, drive. Kids, don't look." And I just love that because clearly Gary Larson knew a little bit about nudibranchs. They are the most fascinating gastropods you will ever come across. They come in an incredible array of body shapes and colors. They live all around the world in tropical lagoons, but they also live in estuaries. The Latin name nudibranch means in English naked gills. And so there are innumerable jokes about nudies and nakedness. And I've thrown a few of these sophomoric jokes into my presentation just to spice it up a bit, keep the middle schoolers amongst us entertained. Whenever I'm talking to kids about this, they're fascinated by all that. So anyway, we're moving right along. Because they are gastropods, that means they're in the same group of animals that slugs and snails on land are. The difference is that they don't have shells to protect themselves. And instead of having a shell, they have toxins in their bodies typically. Sometimes they've acquired it from the food that they eat. And not having a shell, even though it does provide some protection, it allows them to evolve over time and to create these incredibly crazy body shapes that make sense for their environment, but that to us seem fantastical and amazing and colorful. The three animals down at the bottom of the page are called sea slugs, but they are not nudibranchs. All three of these live in Lake Merritt. And they are also fabulous, but they're not going to be what I'm talking about today. Sea slugs are vegetarians, among other things. And these three live on the ulva and the other algae that live in Lake Merritt. They're fabulous. The one on the left has some ability to steal the chloroplasts from the algae, and that photosynthesis continues inside its body to give it energy. So it's sort of a stealer of solar energy, if you like. It's a really amazing process. But I'm not going to talk about that. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is, what is a nudibranch good for? What does it do? And to me, this is one of the more fabulous things. Nudibranchs are, generally are less than an inch, certainly less than 3 inches, except for a couple of our really big species. And as a gastropod, that means that they move on 1 foot. The nudibranch in this picture, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but it's rearing up and showing us a lot of its foot. And it can actually use that foot to move along on the surface tension of the water upside down. And sometimes in tide pools, you'll see them doing that, which is very, very cool indeed. The other thing that nudibranchs are interesting for is that they perceive the world almost totally differently than we do. We have vision, we have other senses that we use to get around and to navigate our world. And the two that we're really not good at are the ones that they are the best at. They use their rhinophores, which are these 2 little ear-like structures on the tops of their heads, to sense chemicals in the water. So that's like underwater smell. We can't do that. That's really cool. The other thing that they're really good at is their tentacles, their touch, their sense of touch helps them find food and mates and avoid predators. They don't have too many hobbies. When they're in their adult form, they eat almost constantly. And when they're not eating, they are making more nudibranchs. And sometimes they can do those simultaneously. So congratulations to the nudibranchs. People care about nudibranchs not only because they look cool and they are cool, but because there's a number of uses for them in science. Because they have soft bodies and really big nerves, nerve physiology. They are an animal model for some studies on nerves. Regeneration. Nudibranchs have the ability to regenerate some of their body parts if they are attacked by a predator. So if a crab comes along and clips off a couple of these fluffy things on their backs, which are called serrata, they can actually regrow them. They can regrow a rhinophore. They can regrow a piece of their foot if that gets damaged. So that's really cool too. But today we're going to be talking primarily about nudibranchs as ecological canaries in a coal mine. Because they live very short lives and because they are very food specific and picky about their water quality conditions and that kind of thing. They are an ideal animal for understanding climate change, both on the outer coast where you see range shifts, different species of nudibranchs expanding or contracting up and down northward or southward on the Pacific coast. But also in this case, to tell us a little bit about what's going on with the lake water quality at Lake Merritt. A few quick notes about nudibranch parts. Up front, they have these really long oral tentacles generally. Some of them have very short oral tentacles. And the mouth is right in the middle of the two of them. So they use these long oral tentacles to sweep food into their mouth. And these long, tall, stalk-like things are their rhinophores. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. But rather than, although they look like maybe rabbit ears or something like that, they really function much more like our nose. It's not quite the same, but they're chemical sensors, and that's their primary way of seeing the world. They do have eyes. Some are a little more functional than others, but they generally are only for light and dark. Then on the sides of their bodies, on their right-hand side, they have a genital pore, and that's what we call the sort of hatch that allows them to line up right side to right sides with another nudibranch to mate. They are simultaneous hermaphrodites, like many other gastropods, meaning they are both male and female at the same time, and they theoretically exchange sperm packets with each other and to fertilize eggs. And after they mate, they generally start right away laying their egg masses. And I have some photos of that later on. Up on top of the nudibranch, we have these fluffy bits up here, which I mentioned before. These are called serrata on an aeolid nudibranch. They are both for defense. At the tips is where they have some stinging cells that they have stolen from their food prey. And so these function as digestion and respiration both. These serrata give them a tremendous amount of surface area where they can exchange oxygen straight through that. But the dark cores that you can see on this sacchareolus is their digestive tract as well. So if a predator bites off a little of that, they still have plenty more and they can afford to lose a few. And then I think we already talked about their feet a little bit. We do have one Dorid species in the lake, which is a different body model shape that doesn't have serrata. but instead it has a fluffy flower-like gill surrounding its anus on the top of its body that allows it to respirate. So I'll show you when we get to that photo. A few nudie stats about California. We are the #1 state in the United States for described species of nudibranchs. Florida only has about 90 and we have 140, so yay, California. Of those 140, 8 live in Lake Merritt. That's not a tremendous amount. On the outer coast of, say, San Mateo County, at a low tide, if you're walking around, you can probably see 30 species just tide pooling on a really good day in the summertime. But the 8 described species in Lake Merritt include 4 natives and 4 introduced species. And in addition to those 8, we have 2 completely undescribed species that we need more work on. This nudibranch in this picture is a Spanish shawl from the outer coast of California. And the reason I included that one is that you can see the long purple oral tentacles, the orange serrata, and the genital pore on its right side right here, which is closed right now. This is its mouth, and it's the shorter oral tentacles sort of obscuring that, but that's where the mouth is as well. Here are the Lake Nudibranch, the Lake Merritt nudibranchs that we saw this year. We have some really beautiful species. They are very tiny. The white-crested aeolid is one of the smallest here. And it was one of the first times that it had been seen in the lake. The same with the Morro Bay aeolid. Hedgepeth dorids are the most likely dorid that you would see if you were looking along the docks at Lake Merritt, or maybe investigating some of the rocks on the sides. And then we have this incredible beauty called a coxcomb nudibranch that Damon Ty found in 2016. They are much more common in Alameda and some areas inside the bay, but they had not been seen in Lake Merritt until 2016, and they haven't been seen there since. So that's a really gorgeous one. It can get up to about 2-3 inches long. And if you see it, you would stop in your tracks. It's amazing. We do have the 4 introduced species as well. They are from all over the world, as you can see. And the first time for these as well. So the Misaki aeolid has been documented in San Francisco Bay for a while, but this was the first time this year that it was seen in Lake Merritt, and that was following the algae bloom. The same goes for the spotted lagoon aeolid, which is a very, very tiny aeolid, this guy over here on the right, which has not been seen since the 1970s. That was one of the trivia questions. But Dr. Jim Carlton, who I think might be with us, was the first to document that species in Lake Merritt, along with this one down here, whose common name is the lost Chthona perca, which I believe was described from Brazil, but has been seen all over the world, hence the common name. And then this beauty here, the flat Ocania, is our most dorid-shaped of the dorids that are in Lake Merritt. It has a big fluffy gill in the back and a very flat body shape with these unusual papillae on the sides. For those of you who are familiar with the outer coast tide pooling, the flat Ocania is in the same genus as the Hopkins rose, the bright pink, flashy, impossible to miss nudibranch that had a big boom in, I think was 2017. So we have 2 Ocania in California, thanks to this invasive from Japan.
Robin?
Yes.
Hi, you had Somebody asked a question in chat, and it seems like it was.
Oh yeah, I have chat shut off. You're going to have to actually use your voice because it takes up too much of my screen and I can't see. Let's see. Let me turn it on so I can have a look.
So it was from April.
Yes, April. Yeah. That is a really good question. Thank you for slowing me down to answer it. Let me just go back. Previous. So for these ones that were first time in Lake Merritt, both this one and the ones that are natives, they have been seen in California in other locations, just not Lake Merritt. So they are typically, let me go back one more. Both the white-crested aeolid and the Morro Bay aeolid are in our area. They've been seen in numerous marinas, and on the outer coast as well. So they are native to California, but they are new to Lake Merritt only. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so we've got, I'm going to go ahead and reduce the chat again because it takes up too much space. And I think but again, if you have a question, raise your hand for Katie or just yell out and I'm happy to answer questions. So we have two undescribed nudibranchs as well in Lake Merritt. One of them we're calling the Sicoriolus species now, in genus Sicoriolus. It is probably one of the more common nudibranchs that you would see in Lake Merritt. And it used to be thought to be Sicoriolus enosimensis, a Japanese species. But now there is now some publicly available DNA data that seems to indicate that it's not, in fact, the same species as the one from Japan. So it might be a native here. It might be something else. It's one of those instances where we say more work needs to be done. But if you are looking for nudibranchs along the lake, or particularly in the Lake Merritt Channel, it's quite possible that you would see one of these. They're about an inch long. They're absolutely gorgeous with that orange face with these beautiful white dots on it. Yeah, definitely a lovely nudibranch species.
Robin,
yes.
If you don't want to go into this now, great, but maybe at the end, if you could talk about what that process is like, going from an undescribed species, which you did a really nice job of describing it. So undescribed to making it like a truth recognized species.
Right. So this might actually be a good spot for that. Although I can talk about it later too. I am not a scientist. I am a citizen scientist. So when it comes to the DNA work, the dissection, and the formal scientific language description of nudibranchs, I am a fan, but I am not a scientist myself. There may be some scientists on this chat, however, who may be able to weigh in at some point and describe it. But in essence, samples of the nudibranchs are acquired and they are sequenced, hopefully more than one, and dissection and careful description of, measurements and all of the anatomy goes into a paper that is then peer reviewed and published in one of the journals. So it is the typical process for that.
Do you know if that's underway with this species? Because as you say, it's frequently seen, right? Or fairly frequently?
Right. Yeah. So later on in the talk, I'll be talking about other undescribed species. And there is a shopping list for those of you who feel like doing some nudibranch research of undescribed species that are still available, undescribed in California. And we're just waiting for a scientist to get around to doing that. So it's a matter of funding and priority, and it'll hopefully get there. Those of us who are enthusiastic, we immediately want an answer for everything. What is this creature? And sometimes we just have to wait and be patient. And this is definitely one of those cases. So this second nudibranch down below there, these are not to scale, by the way. The second nudibranch is one that was seen for the first time in Lake Merritt immediately following the harmful algae bloom. And I will talk about it a little bit in greater detail. I have another slide for it at the end of the program, but this was a particularly special one. So it got its own slide, but later on. Yes, Carl.
Just curious, but
Yeah.
what is the rarest species of nudibranch that you've found so far?
I would have to say this one down here at the bottom. It's potentially new to science. It hasn't been seen in California before until last year. But there are some rarities too. The spotted lagoon aeolid is very tiny as well. Both of them are about the size of a grain of rice. And it hasn't been seen in Lake Merritt since the 70s, although it's known to be around in the bay, both up here and down in, I've seen one in Mission Bay in San Diego as well. So it's hard to know with these very, very small ones, whether they truly are rare or they're just incredibly difficult to find and photograph. So yeah, more work is needed. You'll hear me saying a lot about this in the presentation. So get into what happened with the harmful algae bloom. First, I wanted to set a stage of what is normal for Lake Merritt, because it is a very unique habitat. As we learned in the trivia questions, it's a 155-acre tidal lagoon right smack in the middle of urban Oakland, California. That's super unique. It is, to my knowledge, completely surrounded by concrete with only a few patches where there is a beach, if you like, that go down. In 1962, just to set perspective for our current atmospheric river, in 1962, they received 9 inches of rain in 24 hours. In the last week or so, we've gotten about that same amount, but imagine getting that all in one day. The lake went up 7.3 feet during that flood and completely knocked out traffic and the neighborhood around it. And as a result of that, a series of flood control measures were put in, some gates and other things that were completed by 1978. And as Katie said, we've got 62 storm drains that all dump into Lake Merritt. All the urban runoff, everything that happens in Oakland dumps through these storm drains into the lake. So from an ecological point of view, that's disruptive. The other thing that's interesting about being a tidal lagoon, of course, is that it's subject to the tides. So every 6 hours, we have a high tide and a low tide, and then another high tide and a low tide. And because the tidal gates are typically open, that allows water to be exchanged between Lake Merritt and the San Francisco Bay. So you get this mix of quote unquote old water and new water coming in and out. The salinity is different at different depths, which is why Katie's group measures the surface salinity and temperature and other things, and also at the bottom. The result of that, combined with the fact that Lake Merritt is super close to the port of Oakland, means that we have this incredible diverse soup, if you like, of native and non-native species that normally would not be in proximity to each other. It's a bit like a zoo in that sense. And some things survive, some things don't survive. You have to be pretty tough to live in Lake Merritt. And if you're a small invertebrate that has come to California and maybe in a ship or something like that, as plankton, and then you settle out in Lake Merritt, there's a good chance you'll be eaten by something else that's tough. But we do have species that have been able to thrive there. And this is a photo that I took in a marina of one of the nudibranchs. Again, this is that beautiful Sacuraeolus on red beard sponge, on Cleona. There's some anemones here. There looks like there's some really tiny hydroids you probably can't see unless you have a really big screen. But we have this soup, and it varies from season to season. It's a fabulous laboratory for sure. Then August 28th happened. Last summer, as most of you know, we dropped all the way down to 0 for dissolved oxygen in Lake Merritt. For 5 days, there was no oxygen in the lake, either at the top or the bottom, according to the data that was collected. And this is the first time that this has happened in 25 years. It was a bit of an apocalypse, and thousands of marine animals that were in the lake suffocated and died. And we saw them gasping for air at the surface initially. And then a day or two later, thousands and thousands of dead fish and dead invertebrates were on the side of the lake. It was caused, we think, by a harmful algae bloom. And there have been full talks about it, so I'm not going to go into great detail about the causes and the possibilities for future and how we can mitigate that. Damon Ty did a really good presentation on it a few weeks ago, which I would encourage all of you to take a look at if you're interested in how that happened and how it was documented. But it was quite shocking for sure. But the interesting thing about this is that after those 5 days, new seawater came in from the San Francisco Bay again. And when it came in, the high school students that are part of Friends of the Rotary Nature Center Friends, the high school students that are part of the Achieve program that did the water monitoring, noticed that the lake pretty quickly settled back to whatever normal is for Lake Merritt. And then it kind of stayed that way for about 4 months until just a week or so ago when we had the big rains. So, we had this apocalypse, and then the conditions sort of settled back to what is normal for this time of year, for fall, in Lake Merritt, which is a mostly marine environment because the new fresh water has not come back in. Oxygen returned to normal, salinity returned to, near or even over what the ocean is. So that was pretty amazing. And when that happened, that's when I came to check things out. And already some of the nudibranch food species were already there. Bryozoans, hydroids, anemones had already put out new polyps. They were starting to establish themselves. This picture here is an introduced species of anemone called an orange striped green anemone. And here it is on a sycamore leaf. It had crawled out there onto the leaf that had fallen into the lake during the fall. These bryozoans, which are called moss animals and kind of look like nudibranchs, and these hydroids with their little delicate polyps regrown already from the stolons, were there. And what is so interesting about this is that these really tough species, they survived a completely anoxic event for 5 days. And then the nudibranchs came. So this is a photo, microscope photo from Katie Noonan that shows a live nudibranch veliger, which is the larva form of a nudibranch, that had arrived in the lake with that new seawater. They don't look much like adult nudibranchs. They have a shell, which is really interesting. You can kind of see it here. And they are still able to sniff out their prey with these structures that protrude from the shell. And they're also able to move the cilia on their bodies in a kind of in the same way that a human sitting in an inner tube gets around. I mean, it's not very efficient. You have to do a lot of thrashing around, but they are able to move themselves up and down the water column and find their specific food prey, which is those anemones, bryozoa, so forth, depending on the species of nudibranch. There's also a possibility that there were fewer predators at that time. The fish were completely knocked out or near knocked out in Lake Merritt. Same with the other filter feeding species that would typically suck down veligers like mussels and other bivalves, which are just now starting to come back. Once the Lake nudibranchs established themselves in their adult forms, they started restocking the lake immediately. That's one of their favorite hobbies. And I was able to photograph at least 4 species egg masses in those few weeks following the harmful algae event. They don't always make good choices. This Polycera chose to lay its egg ribbon on a gull feather. This one's on a submerged leaf. But in general, there was a giant burst of nudibranch activity within a month of the harmful algae bloom. And all these nudibranchs settled out of the new seawater. They found this wonderful habitat filled with their favorite foods, and they started breeding. But it's an estuary. And every time there's a boom like this, the freshwater comes in the fall or in the wintertime. And Nudibranch Boomtown is now shut down. It's completely busted. These lakes, these docks over here, the green on the right-hand side, are completely covered with water right now. And the freshwater level is all the way down to the bottom. Katie, you were telling me, I think that we are at 2 or something like that.
Yeah, 2 or 3 parts per million at the top.
Yeah. So in essence, Lake Merritt is now a freshwater body of water. And so we will see what happens after this. The nudibranch population adult nudibranch population has probably been knocked out. Those eggs, some percentage of them probably will survive out in the Alameda Channel and be coming in again as veligers again in the spring or early summer once the rains stop. But for now, Boomtown is closed for business. I did promise you that I would talk a little bit more about the new nudibranch that was seen for the first time in Lake Merritt. It was first spotted last summer by Lou Ann Roberts. That's her down in the corner. And that was in Berkeley, in the Berkeley Marina. And I've since seen, I want to say 4 more, I could be wrong about that, in Lake Merritt on the docks. And we don't know, the photos that went around to nudibranch scientists were somewhat inconclusive, as they always are, without doing proper DNA and the rest of the research that's required to identify them. So for now, we don't know if it is a native species that was just overlooked before, or if it was introduced from a similar habitat somewhere else in the world through commercial shipping, most likely. So there's a couple of possibilities. There's been some chit chat back and forth on my Flickr page and on my INAT account, primarily, where I've posted most of the pictures of this. This is a very, very tiny sea slug, and I would love it if you guys tag me if you see another one. The top picture, I think, puts it in perspective. This is the tip of a toothpick, the very point of a toothpick. And this little guy is probably, I don't know, 3 millimeters at most. But it's definitely something different than the known species in California. So more work will be done on it, hopefully, and we'll eventually get a name for it. But in the meantime, we're just going to enjoy it as it is.
Do you find those with your bare eyes, or do you have some sort of device you use?
There are people who use magnifying glasses and other things. Mm-hmm. I happen to have very good eyesight. It also helps if you're young, I've noticed, which I am not. But when my kids were young and I would take them into the tide pools on the outer coast, they were spotting things that, were phenomenally small. So yes, I have a search image in my eye. Knowing, the experience and having a search image, helps. But, I have to look at the back of my camera later to see what on earth it is that I have seen. So, yeah. And this is my plea to all of you. There are a number of nudibranchs that are still undescribed in California, and I've listed them on the left, along with some photos of my fellow citizen scientists at work, photo documenting nudibranchs for iNaturalist. Please, please, please get out there and look how beautiful the tide pools are and the outer coast. It's a joy to go out there, even if you don't see a single nudibranch, and post the observations that you make to iNaturalist so that they can be identified and help us with understanding the ranges of the existing species. But also, if you see something new, that's a way to share that information with the rest of the world. So yay, iNaturalist. I'm sure that's said in probably every presentation, but I'm going to repeat that as well. I hope that this has been enthusiastic in terms of stimulating your interest in nudibranchs. A shameless plug for a nudibranch field guide that just came out last year. That's pretty terrific, written by a team mostly up in Seattle of nudibranch scientists and photographers who did a really fantastic job in terms of updating a 2005 field guide with a ton more nudibranchs in it, and it's a good resource. There are also a number of free resources on the internet. I've kind of listed them there, but feel free to ask me about those as well. And with that, a huge thank you to all of you who have sat through all of this. And I am hoping that you all have questions for me.
Do you have any suggestions on how to find them? I've loved seeing pictures of them. But I've never actually found one in real life, and I'm dying to someday see one. Yeah, great. Where do you live? Are you in Oakland? I live in San Leandro. Okay. All right. So you probably, at least you can try to find them in Lake Merritt. It's a little bit more of a challenge because they're small and they're randomly seasonal, like what we just talked about, like depending on what happens with the freshwater content in the lake.
there's no point in going out there now until summertime, probably, when the seawater comes back in and the salinity goes back up. In the meantime, we do have some fabulous, really low minus tides that are coming up on the outer coast. So if you have a tide application on your phone or something like that, you can find out when the best time to go is. You want to go when the tide is 0.0 or less, ideally. And of course, you can use iNaturalist to find where some of the locations are that people have seen a wide variety of nudibranchs. Julie, are you still here? Julie Waters? Maybe. Anyway, Julie was with the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve for many, many years, which is a fabulous place to see not only nudibranchs, but many, many other species of marine life. And I highly recommend checking that out, checking out Pillar Point in San Mateo in Half Moon Bay. Further up the coast, there's Duxbury Reef and some other really beautiful places where you can just kind of go slowly through the tide pools and find these creatures, or docks, which is, what we do at Lake Merritt.
I'm here, Robin.
Oh, you are there. Oh, hi,
Yeah.
Julie.
I had to unmute.
Would you put in a plug, please, for Fitzgerald? It's such an awesome place.
So what you need to know about Fitzgerald is that you cannot pick up things there because it's a marine reserve.
Correct.
And really the best way to look at nudibranchs is to pick them up and look at them because they're so tiny. So,
we try to photograph them in place when possible.
Yes, yes. But the places you mentioned are good. And then I always, if I'm going to some place, like say if I'm up in Oregon or somewhere, I go to iNaturalist.
Right. To
I look at the Explore tab and I can see what's found around there.
I totally agree. It's a wonderful resource.
Yeah. And if you go to Pillar Point, obviously it's very crowded at low tides.
Yeah.
Come early, plan to walk for a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for jumping in.
Swimming, or do you tend to see them crawling on things?
It's kind of a mix in tide pools. For the most part, they will stay on their food source, which is why the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve and other places don't want you to handle nudibranchs. Nudibranchs are super specific to their food. And if they come off their food in some way, they're likely to die because they're just rather not eat than eat the wrong thing. Which is kind of annoying from a husbandry point of view. That's why you don't see nudibranchs in aquariums or zoos very often. But yeah, occasionally they will do that surface tension thing where they're swimming, floating on the surface. But for the most part, they are an animal that crawls around on its food.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
So, Robin,
Katie?
Oh, yeah. Okay, go ahead, David.
A couple of things here. Oh, thank you so much, Robin, for this wonderful, wonderful talk.
Yeah, sure.
And, for me, I work with Katie and I'm out in the field often. And I think I was there when one of the unnamed nudibranchs were discovered at Lake Merritt. But to see your photos, it almost felt like I was looking at having a different experience with the organism.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It makes a big difference to have that underwater macro camera. These things are really tiny, and I probably dragged you over and forced you to look at this little rice grain, and you're like, yeah, okay, so what?
Well, but on the other hand, having seen your photos now, I'm so much more inspired.
Great.
With the toothpick.
Yeah, I know.
That's the creature that I think I was there, and I was so.
It probably was. I was pretty excited.
I was so uninterested in as I watched your excitement, but now seeing it here tonight, wow!
Okay.
And I wonder, here's my question, and I mean, to what extent can we, those of us who out there fiddling around with our cell phones,
Yeah.
bring in a photo like that?
Well, the good news is they're not all that tiny. The one that's on the screen right now is, gets up to about 1.5 inches. And I know that Katie's students were able to take good pictures of one or two with cell phones. Obviously, try not to drop the phone in the water. That's a occupational hazard as well. But modern cell phones are pretty amazing. And you can buy these little $10 clips that is like a macro lens that you clip over the original lens on the camera. I don't know if you've ever seen those. They're on, they're cheap.
Oh, I see. Well, that's a good point that we could maybe get in without spending too much money. We can improve our images.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Trust me, like you said. Yeah, it's.
I did want to make a comment on what you were just speaking on, and question whether or not it's a real fundamental difference between those
you got it,
nudibranchs
yeah,
that crawl along the floor and eat, and those that are able to float freely or hang at the surface and eat. I thought those were whole sort of different breeds, if you will.
No, it's the same nudibranchs. When they're at the surface like that, they're generally moving from one food source to another, or they're escaping a predator. There's no food for them in the water. So they're, they need to land again and find food. Yeah.
Well, okay.
So fascinating.
Okay.
Guys,
I hear you, Katie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to say we're nearing the end of our hour, and we if Robin's available, we could stay a little bit after. Are you available for?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Paula and Manisha, I don't know if you guys are still listening or not, but you mentioned the David Bowie site, the Bowie Bronchia, where they put side-by-side photos of David Bowie and his outfits with nudibranchs. In fact, that first slide, one of the first slides that I put in of the nudibranch sort of rearing back, that was chosen. It was a huge honor to me. It was chosen for Bowie Bronchia.
That's amazing.
I've had photographs in, Smithsonian or other prestigious places, but honestly, like having one of my slugs chosen for Bowie Bronchia was the best.
This was just a wonderful way to start the new year. Such an amazing group of animals, and I feel so privileged to. I think one of the best ways to see them is to be there with and other groups of iNaturalist people and enthusiasts like Robin, because it's infectious, and they know how to find them and show them to you. So we would like to say thank you so much for coming, everyone here. And we want to thank all of the iNaturalist observers and awesome photographers that have provided the beautiful photos. I'd like to thank all of the community watchers, lake watchers in Oakland, who keep a close watch on Lake Merritt and its wildlife and are eager to learn more. To achieve, the kids are great, and they're getting really good at taking photos and excited about doing that. I want to mention that our program was brought to you by Rotary Nature Center Friends, and coming up, we have an in-person Adopt a Spot Workday on Martin Luther King Day, January 14th, if it is okay to do so after the next atmospheric river comes through. We'll have information on our website about that. And in addition, coming up in February, for Lakeside Chat number 27, we're going to hear from Dr. Jerry Lips, retired professor and curator of UC Berkeley Museum of Paleontology, who's going to talk about Lake Merritt, past and future. And he says that he likes to be spontaneous, and I thought that's great. So we're going to hear a great talk by Jerry Lips on February, I believe, 3rd, not 2nd, 3rd. before it gets on too far. Okay, so if you enjoy Lakeside Chats and what we're doing, please consider making a donation so that we can improve our work and improve our outreach to the community with on-site activities. We also have some beautiful calendars with Lake Merritt Wildlife that were created by Kirsten Furman. It's on a program tonight. And they're wonderful ways to be at Lake Merritt if you can't be there, or to learn about the birds and other wildlife and where they are located on the lake. It's a really great educational calendar. And you can also make a donation on our website by going to our website and finding the donation button. Our program tonight will be rebroadcast by the City of Oakland KTOP TV channel, and you can go to the City of Oakland website to find out the details. It's on Sundays from 6 to 7 p.m. And in the first two weekends, they show the old or past programs, and then they will show the new one at the end of the month. I'd like to thank our producer, Lav Lamone, for media and videos. David Wofford and I are co-chairs. Kirsten Furman is art and design director. We have Dr. Janice Lord Walker, Betsy Schultz, and Patty Donald, all retired teachers, and many other volunteers who help us out with our work. We work closely with the Lake Merritt Institute that cleans up that trash directly out of the lake. And if you'd like to help out, there's going to be a lot in the next couple of weeks with the storms that are coming through. They'll just clean out all the storm drains and dump it in Lake Merritt. So we organize a number of activities. If you are interested, please contact us and we will do our best to work with you to create a program for your students or your group that meets your desires and your needs. So thank you so much for being here. And that is the end of the formal show. And we would be delighted now if Robin wants to field some more questions or discussion.
Yeah. I noticed that there were a couple in the chat that I hadn't noticed. So I do want to get to those for sure. Julie, you asked why the egg ribbons are in a spiral. It may have something to do with the fact that the same genital pore that I was talking about before that's on the right side of the nudibranchs is also where the eggs are extruded from. And nudibranchs tend to feed and lay their eggs in the same place. Why they're in a spiral, I have no idea. You're going to have to ask a really much more qualified person than myself, but they definitely are. And you can definitely identify, at least to a general family level, what nudibranch laid those eggs or laid down those egg ribbons. Thanks for that question. There was another question from Michael Helm. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, you were asking about the chlorophyll stilling sea slug that I mentioned in the very beginning of the program. We do have them here. We have at least one species. The large green one that I showed a photo of is Eliza hedgepethi. Another wonderful slug name for Joel Hedgepeth, which I saw you guys mention in the presentation as well. So they are here. They tend to be worldwide. There's some in the Caribbean. There's some in the Indo-Pacific. That all have a strategy of stealing chloroplasts and using them to generate their own energy, which is amazing. Yeah.
You mentioned escaping a predator. What are their predators?
In their adult form, there really aren't that many, probably because of the toxins in their body more than anything else. Nudibranchs tend to go one way or the other on their coloring. They'll either be really blending in with their environment, like a lot of the ones that we see in Lake Nudibranch, where they're just kind of beige and, tiny so that they don't get noticed by predators. but some of them use real flamboyant colors to warn predators that they are toxic, so that predators that learn such things, like fish that are slightly brighter than the others, will learn that something colored that way, it doesn't taste good, it's toxic. So yeah, it can kind of be, you know, they're, like I said, they have a lot of different strategies for accomplishing the same goal. I think honestly they're a little bit more vulnerable when they're villagers, because in Lake Merritt, at least, we do have prior to the harmful algae bloom, we had a lot of bivalves. We had a number of mussels, both natives and invasives. We had a lot of different kind of clams, things like that, that filter feed. Barnacles were everywhere. And some of those barnacles survived, by the way. And you see their little feeding mechanisms out there. But yeah. So for a while, the mussels and the bivalves have been knocked out, but I've seen them already reattaching and regrowing. So I imagine that come late spring or summer, when the new crop of nudibranch villagers comes into Lake Merritt, there will be predators waiting to eat many of them as well. Let's see what else we've got. Record swell. Joe, you asked about the Santa Cruz swells and the storm on the outer coast. Nudibranchs generally don't survive all of that. They hang on and they get down under rocks and they get down into places. But if they get knocked loose, that's probably the end for them, because they don't have food at that point. They might be washed up into the tide pools after a storm. Sometimes we see subtidal species that we don't normally get to see after storms, because they've been tossed up into the tide pools. But they're typically their preferred food for prey isn't there. So yeah, again, the seasonality of nudibranchs is a real challenge to figure out. They don't live that long. April, you just asked about that too. Some of the species only have an adult form for a few months, whereas some of the big dorids that we see on the outer coast, like the sea lemons, things like that, they can live for a couple of years. So somewhere in between there. Yeah. Let's see what else we got. Oh, Emily, you asked if nudibranchs are safe to touch and pick up. Yes. Do be mindful of that, and thank you for asking. We don't want to handle them more than we need to, because we want them to survive the encounter. We like them. We want them to survive. That said, if I'm doing some kind of like scientific photography or something like that, and I need to handle one, you want to try to minimize that contact as much as possible. Definitely keep them submerged in water the entire time. As far as being safe for humans to handle, I have been stung badly only once. And that was a very large Hermesenda nudibranch that was in a marina that had been eating sea nettles instead of its normal prey. It had been munching on a dead sea nettle that was sort of pushed up against the dock where it was. And it was such a large and beautiful and fabulous Hermesenda that I thought I needed photos of it. And when I handled its serrata, the stinging nematocysts that it had absorbed from the sea nettle were lodged in the very tips of the serrata. So it gave me a good wallop on my hand. It made it through my skin, but in general, the nematocysts are too small and our skin is too thick for them to do much damage to us. There are a few hydroids in our area that, if you have your hands digging around looking for nudibranchs, you can end up with a rashy-like thing. But in general, it's reasonably safe to get out there and look for them. Let's see, what else have we got here? Let's see. I have a question. Yes, the David Bowie question. We already got to that. It is awesome. Let's see what else we have. Manisha, you were asking how I got interested in nudibranchs. It wasn't through tide pooling as a kid, actually. You would think that was the case. My grandparents retired to Kauai, and I thought it was normal to go to Hawaii twice a year to visit your grandparents and snorkel. But I always thought that nudibranchs were tropical only, required scuba diving equipment and all that. So when I finally did see one in our outer coast tide pool, I was blown away by the colors and how could this thing live here this whole time? And I think I'm interested in tide pooling, and I never saw one. So yeah. Sometimes you come to these things late in life, and yeah, that's about it. Yeah, never too late, I guess, is the answer. And thank you for whoever noticed my Spanish shawl pin. Shout out to Owl and Bear Studios in Canada for that wonderful creation there. She's an awesome artist on Etsy, Owl and Bear Studio. Yeah. Emily, you were asking about a full-time job. No, I am retired. I do not get paid for anything to do with nudibranchs. And I think there's a very, very small percentage of people who make a living purely on nudibranchs. That said, however, I love them and I'm very passionate about them. And if you can find full-time employment, in the field of nudibranchs, yay, more power to you. That'd be really awesome. So good luck if that's what you decide you want to do. Let's see. And we have the cal photo. Oh, you all, thank you, Dr. Light, for mentioning cal photos as well. That's a great resource for looking at photos of nudibranchs, especially if you're trying to identify. Let's see. Joy wants to know how on earth. Yeah, so how did I learn all of this? I was just super interested, I guess. And this book helped a lot. I spent all kinds of quality time with my field guide trying to identify things. But I would also say that the iNaturalist community is super supportive. The scientists who spend their time helping newbies identify their photos, and you can even ask them a question. It's an unprecedented level of access for someone who's just enthusiastic but doesn't have the skills. The scientists are super kind and super generous with their time on iNaturalist. And if you ask them, how can you tell a sea lemon from a Monterey Dorad? They look the same. Someone's going to take the time and write it out for you. It's the most supportive community for learning something very random that you can possibly imagine. So I think it's just asking questions and being persistent. Yeah. Debbie asks if nudibranchs have radula, and absolutely, yes, they do. They have tiny little fangs in there that they use to rasp off pieces of sponge or hydroid before consuming them. They tend to focus on prey that nobody else wants. And absolutely, those little tiny shark teeth are exactly what they use to help themselves. Non-nudibranchs, for the most part, do not have radula. Some do, I think, but what comes to mind is the sacaglossums, who have something akin to one of those reusable straws, those metal straws we're all supposed to be using now. They have like a tube straw. And once they've sucked the juice out of the algae that they enjoy, they actually take that little straw and put it in a sac in their body. They're called sacaglossans because they actually store this thing in a little pouch. That's so amazing and improbable. But yes. And David, you have 3 rapid fire questions. So why don't you unmute and let's have at it. Let's see if we can help you out.
You're right. They are so fascinating. Thank you so much.
You can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is crazy. Yeah.
Now, okay, so I want to just spit this out here. When you spoke about the nudibranchs floating through the water and feeding,
they don't feed in the water. They're only moving from one place to another in the water. And not well.
I thought that a few of them through the water, and as a way of escaping prey. I don't know what the others do, but I only thought it was a few. And then that there of those, some could turn upside down or something like that and feed as a way of living as well. So if you wanted to clarify that for me.
No, I'm sorry. I definitely should do that. So nudibranchs live on the substrate for the most part. So that means either a rock or the side of the dock or something like that. And they're crawling along, like you would expect. If something's, so threatening to them that they need to leave that surface and abandon ship, if you like. It's an emergency procedure for sure. They lift off the surface and they sort of thrash their body around in this sort of very inelegant, unhappy way, and make it to another location where hopefully that predator is not. When they are on the surface tension of the surface of the water, they're able to crawl on the surface tension to a new location. But they're not feeding, they're not doing anything else. Those are just, like pulling the ripcord on a parachute at that point. Does that make sense?
It does. And
okay.
Although it brings up other questions, but I don't want to beat it all night.
All right.
So I'll move on to what I already had, which was the coloring.
Yes. I think I've lost your audio.
There's such fantastic colors that we can find in images.
David, I don't think I have your
relationship to poisons and the coloring. Well, can you hear me now? I hear you.
Oh, yes. Okay, there you are again. Okay, lost you there for a bit, but you were asking about coloration.
The relationship between their coloration and a message to predators and people that would eat them, that they were not good to eat. Right. They don't produce poisons or their own food. Is that how that works? I wanted to hear.
I'm sorry, you cut out just at the key point of the question. They don't produce what?
It's not as if they produce a poison.
Right.
But they eat something and just transfer it.
Yeah. That process isn't really well understood, but there are nudibranchs that are definitely toxic. And they get some of their coloration from their food even. Like the one that's on my pin right here, that Spanish shell that's purple and orange. That comes from a specific chemical compound that's found in their food. That is also distasteful probably, and warns away predators. So it's pretty efficient. It seems like it's just for beauty, but remember, they don't have eyes. They can't see their own beauty. They just have these little tiny eye spots.
Well, thank you. I know we're still in prime time,
But did you say anything regarding their reproduction, which I find absolutely fascinating?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. For us mammals, we're not used to such a thing. But properly, I should always refer to nudibranchs as probably they, because they are simultaneous hermaphrodites, like snails and some other things that are other gastropods. So they are both male and female at the same time. When they connect their genital pores together and exchange sperm back and forth, sometimes it's one way, but ideally it's in both directions. It's a more efficient way for nudibranchs to reproduce, in that any nudibranch that they see of the same species they can mate with. They don't have to wait for one of the opposite sex, if that makes sense.
It does for me, but just in case, I'd like to repeat that for others. So because it's so rare that I have an opportunity to reproduce, I am male and female. And whenever I run into you, if I'm lucky enough to, you are also male and female.
Yes.
And while we're together, we will exchange eggs and sperm.
Not the eggs, just the sperm packets.
I see.
Yeah.
But it's possible for us both to leave the experience pregnant.
Yes, in fact, that's the ideal. And then we both go and lay our little egg spirals on whatever appropriate surface we think we find. We go our merry way. Yeah.
That's an amazing thing.
I know, it's crazy, but that's what they do.
I said I had 3 questions plus 1. The plus 1 is if you have a chance, say anything about that giant print on the wall behind you.
Oh, the giant print on the wall behind me. Thank you for asking. I got it in Congo, in Brazzaville, Congo. My son is a drummer who prefers African rhythms above all others, and specifically the rhythms of Central Africa. Ever since he was 3 years old, he would go to the Malonga Center and drum. And so in, I think, 2017, we had the opportunity to go to Congo, and he played there for a number of weeks. And I found this in the shop and I really liked it. It's a lapa, really. It's meant to be worn as a skirt, commemorating International Women's Day in Brazzaville. So that's the story of that fabric anyway. Over my other shoulder is some of my kids' artwork.
Well, how fascinating is that? I don't know if you guys can see this here. Hello. I have kind of a son there, a nephew.
Hey, son.
Hi.
How are you?
He also grew up at the Malonga Center, learning
Fabulous.
African drums.
Yes.
There.
Exactly. Wonderful. That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yes, it's wonderful. Yes, his teacher was Takuma King, if you know him.
Yeah, so my son started with Takuma King as well, but later moved more to Ngoma. And yeah.
I never would have thought I would have lived long enough to have these experiences and be connecting my experience.
The Bay Area is amazing. Yeah.
With the Nudibranch in
Right?
Lake Merritt.
The Bay Area, I'll tell you, you can find your passion, whatever it is, whether it's nudibranchs or Ngoma, you know?
Oh, yes. So thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime. Good to connect.
That was amazing. Robin, in the Boomtown, do the nudibranchs interact with one another? I mean, it must be fairly competitive. Do they, and they're different sizes.
Yeah.
How do they interact?
Between the species or between individuals?
Within a species, we have different sizes, like of the Sucuriolus, they were different sizes.
Right, exactly. So
some of them take advantage of the situation to others.
Not particular. I mean, there's only really one species in California that is a frequent consumer of other nudibranchs. That's the Hilton's aeolid that we see on the outer coast, and they will actively hunt down smaller nudibranchs and eat them. But for the most part, no. It probably makes mating a little awkward when they're different sizes, but even the small ones are in the adult form. And they, will lay smaller egg spirals. So you see sometimes little tiny ones, and there's a tiny nudibranch right next to it. And then there's a big nudibranch with a big egg spiral. And you do see, different sizes hooking up nonetheless. Somehow it works.
So is the sperm packet like the same size? And is it?
Probably not.
So if you're a little one, you might want to make a sperm packet and not make a bunch of little eggs that are.
Well, you got to do, it's how they work. They do both. Yeah. But none of the species that live in Lake Merritt eat each other. So like you saw in the docks when we were dog fouling with your kids, there'll be many different species on the same dock interacting, and they, if they come face to face, they generally just bump into each other and kind of turn away. They can use those rhinophores on the top of their heads enables them to learn quickly that this is not the same, and they'll move away. They're not terribly feisty with each other. That's a waste of energy.
Thank you. I've heard of forming things like daisy chains, where they'll form a long chain with one, but maybe that wouldn't work so well.
I've seen that in the tropical Indo-Pacific. There are some species that will the way they find each other as mates is again using those chemical sensors, and they'll follow the slime trail, if you like, so that it ends up being a line, right? Which is probably what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, like with those giant sea hares, which are not nudibranchs, but they're in the other category, you get a lot of them in the gates, actually, in the screens on the gates, these big, football-sized sea slugs. They're having a mating party for sure, when they have large aggregations like that. Yeah.
I think it was 2014 or 2016. They had a party in Lake Merritt.
Emily, you were asking about the outer coast. I was basically referring to anywhere that's not inside San Francisco Bay. So it could be Marin. It could be any of our rocky tide pool areas along the coast. My usual stomping ground is from about Monterey up north to, say, Point Reyes-ish. If I feel really into it, I'll drive further north. But, that swath is where I tend to look in the tide pools, just because it's close to my house. But our entire California coast has a huge range of sea slugs. It's really cool.
It was amazing to see so many in Lake Merritt. As a teacher, we would just get so excited when we see a hedge pastorid. And that's all we ever saw. But it was just so amazing. And to be able, as I had more time on my hands when I retired, I became aware of some of the other tinier species, and it's amazing that they're all there.
I agree. Lake Merritt's amazing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
It's something always happening there, something different, in terms of the animals and the ecology. Yeah.
For sure. Well, how are we doing? We're kind of usually wrapping it up at around this time. If people want to send questions in, I could forward them to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
And definitely, if anybody has a burning question you want to, we could probably take one or two more if you would like. But it was a fabulous talk. What a great way to start our new year.
Well, thank you. Thank you, all of you, for putting up with me nattering on about my passion too. It's a treat to be able to talk about nudibranchs for sure.
Oh man, we're gonna have a lot of people hanging their heads over those docks.
Good. Good. And hopefully they'll find some more of those rarities too.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robin, and everyone for coming.
Thank you, all of you. Really, really great. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's all give a big hand for Robin and for all of you for such great questions, and for Lake Merritt, of course.
And thank you, Katie. You bring such great speakers to us that share. And I'll be darned if each and every time I don't think to myself, oh my goodness, this is going to be so boring. And I mean, you would think after 26 times I would have gotten a clue. But here we go. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I did interview Robin about, and she talked a little bit about how she developed her passion and her career and everything. So we're hoping to make little bits of put on our website that might be interesting to teachers and kids that might want to know about.
Yeah. And we can redo that too, so I sound more sane and put together. That's fine.
No, this was totally wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we any final questions? We all just go into gallery and clap our hands and thank you so much. Let's do that.
We have dozens of thank yous in the chat. So.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very kind of you all, for sure. It's been a treat.
Okay.
Okay. Well, have a wonderful New Year, everybody.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And
tonight, stay dry.
Work
with the next round of storms.
Yes. Be careful, everyone.
Yeah.
Check your drains.
Tonight was a full moon, and all day I felt I was moving as slowly as a nudibranch.
Okay, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next time, I hope.